Hello friend, my name is Doombabe, and today we are going to be talking about Cursed Sight, which is an independent visual novel created by Invert Mouse and released in August of this year. It tells the story of Guy, a young boy that was sold as a slave to the temple of East Taria, a land that just happens to be in conflict with his homeland of West Taria. This is where he meets Sasa, a temple dancer, and Miyon, a girl with the ability to see into the future and alter it through rituals at the cost of her eyes, striking anyone who sees them dead. As time goes on, the two rivaling factions go to war, and it's up to Miyon to aid her country where she can. But what happens when there's someone on the other side that's just like Miyon that's working against them? So the first thing I noticed when I was playing this game was how absolutely fucking sassy the main character is. Seriously, he has a sharp tongue for an 8-year-old that was just sold by his parents to be a slave, not to a temple in his own country, but to a temple in an enemy country. And he is still so witty. And while that might not mean much to anyone right off the bat, the kind of commentary that can come from a character that's very sassy and upbeat and witty is... It makes the story very engaging, it makes things very enjoyable, even when the character is in a not so great situation. At the same time, he is at no point some sort of Gary Stu. He's selfish, he can be very petty, and he is very easily discouraged. And he's not the only interesting, flawed character, because Miyon, while she cares very deeply for the people she does come close with, is very impatient and she tends to hold people at arm's length. She's also very fussy. Zolu is constantly doubting herself and feels very guilty for things she might not even be at fault for, but she still does what she can to make the others around her very happy. And the Queen of West Taria is kind, but she is also vain and is subject to her own selfishness. So we have a very well-rounded cast that isn't just full of, two-dimensional characters that are really just what the writers wanted to be as people. They're flawed, but they have their good points, and I felt it was a diverse enough cast to really just make the story very enjoyable. I feel like I could have said that a lot better. As for the story, the writing expertly described everything that was happening. They painted a perfect picture with all of the colors of the wind. I didn't need to see what was happening on the screen because the writer was able to describe the entire scene very well, which made me wonder if maybe this was better off as a book instead of a game, for reasons I will elaborate on later. I have to confess though that I feel like the story was really rushed. This was a beautiful story of love and friendship, and it had a sort of feel to it that if you've read anything by Lisa C. or Gail Tsukiyama, Asian American literature, it has a sort of vibe to it. And the game very much harbored that vibe, and I can't explain it any better than that, I'm sorry. But this was an amazing story. It was just so condensed that I found it very difficult to connect with any of the characters or really get into the story that much. I didn't feel like there was enough time given for the characters in the story to properly develop, so if there was a character death, I just couldn't care. I just couldn't bring myself to feel that sad, and if there was a feelsy scene, I couldn't bring myself to really feel the emotion that the writers were trying to draw out of me. And I feel like that was this game's only really true downfall, which, unfortunately for me, this is the most important part of a game, the writing. But I feel like if they had taken the time to stretch the story out into a 6 to 8 hour game instead of a 2-hour game, then it would have been a lot better. As for the gameplay, this pretty much just played like any other visual novel you're going to come across, and I think this was made on a popular engine because I noticed it has a very similar layout to a lot of other games that I've played. I will admit that Invert Mouse did something that I wish a lot more developers did, which was giving us the option to go back to specific scenes to make a different choice. Once you finish the game, if you wanted to see how a certain choice could have changed the story, you could click on a scene and be magically teleported to that part of the game instead of having to replay the entire game all over again. Because as much as I enjoyed the story, there weren't any decisions to be made until the second half of the game, and there are actually 4 endings. So you do get a fair amount of choices in the time frame that you were given. So I'm glad that they did that, not because I didn't want to sit through the entire game again, but because as a reviewer, I play other games and I'm watching other anime, and I don't want to have to take the time to sit through an entire game over and over and over again just so I can unlock as many endings as I can before I decide to review the game. So thank you. It did have a few minor problems that weren't too irritating, but they were just present enough to kind of start getting under my skin. The pointer would lag in some parts, the animation would hitch, and there were times where the text would either lag and deliver words by the handful instead of, properly scrolling the way that normal visual novels do, or it would skip through entire lines before I could fully read what was happening. So that kind of stunk. This is an outrageously beautiful game, and I do not know where to begin. There is an obscene amount of detail in everything. The hair has a beautiful texture to it, with even little stray strands poking out of Miyon's pigtails didn't go unnoticed, and it blended in very well with the clothing, which had the same level of painstaking detail and the way that it naturally folded and fell over the characters' bodies. Because the way that the clothing kind of falls over a person's body is something that a lot of artists tend to mess up, but the creators, whoever did the art, did a fantastic job. I also found the color palettes used to be truly just absolutely gorgeous, with the way that each faction of Taria having its own particular feel, with East Taria being easily discernible by its red and yellow hues that bring a very warm environment, with many characters being accented by gold bells, and West Taria full of rich blues and browns with many characters wearing a blue flower I can't identify. The artist did a fantastic job at creating beautiful scenes that could shift in mood just by a change in lighting. The character designs were just as splendid. I loved how the artist took the time to create these beautiful, one-of-a-kind, unique characters while still preserving certain aspects between each character that gave them a similar feel. You could almost see the cultural differences between each Taria faction just from the way that the characters dressed and styled their hair. If there's anything I wish that the creators did differently, it was I wish that they had more backgrounds and more character sprites. Because while scenes would change colors depending on the time of day, for the most part, the world stills were just recycled variations of each other. Even some of the locations that were meant to be different, such as the East and West Taria temples, were just the same thing with different color schemes or maybe some slight differences. Scenes that weren't recycled were sometimes just a blank screen or panning up at the sky, which was beautifully created. I'm not saying that, the sky was bad, but it kind of like goes back to what I was saying earlier about how maybe this was better off as a book, because I had to rely more on the text to understand what was going on than the actual visuals. And this is a game, so I really shouldn't have to do that. And the same goes for the sprites, because each character seemed to only have maybe 3 or 4 expressions. And this wasn't a very large cast. I think there are only 5 characters in total that even had sprites. So in general, for the most part, it kind of just felt like wasted potential. It would have been nice to just see more variation, I guess. So all in all, I did actually genuinely enjoy Cursed Sight, even though it may seem like I'm complaining a lot. The story was beautiful, even if it felt rushed. The visuals were absolutely, positively gorgeous, and the game had a hauntingly beautiful soundtrack that was nothing short of absolutely superb. It's only like $7 on Steam, so I would actually recommend for someone to go pick this up if they're interested in visual novels and or like Asian Chinese-y literature just because of that vibe. However, because it is so short, with it being like 2 to 2.5 hours long just on your first playthrough, if that does bother you, I would say wait for maybe to see if it goes on sale in the holidays, but I still would really suggest picking this up because I genuinely enjoyed it. Anyways, those are my thoughts on Cursed Sight. Have you seen it? Which did you like better, East or West Taria? Let me know in the comments below. Otherwise, you can find all of my social media as well as my Patreon in the description. Happy unbirthday, and I will see you later. Bye! Shoot that shit! Maybe not.